You sign your name every single day. On forms, on contracts, on cards for people you love, on documents that decide where you live, what you own, who you are in the eyes of the law. You have written it so many times that it stopped meaning anything. Just letters, just a label someone handed you at birth. But here is what nobody told you. That name, your surname, is not a label. It is a coded message, written over 1,000 years ago, by people who crossed open oceans without maps, who carved their gods into wood before they had paper, who built an entire civilization on the edge of ice and storm, and then disappeared into history so completely that the world forgot they were ever there. Except they left something behind. They left your name. And if your surname is on the list we are about to go through, you are not just carrying a word. You are carrying a specific Norse territory, a specific ship route, a specific rank in a warrior society that operated for 300 years across 4 continents and left its DNA, its language, and its surnames in the bloodlines of over 80 million people alive today. 10 surnames, 10 proofs. And by the end of this video, you will know exactly what your name was telling the world about your family over 1,000 years ago, before the word Viking even appeared in a written sentence. Stay until number 1, because number 1 is the most dangerous name on this list, not because of what it means, but because of what it hid. For 900 years, this surname wore a disguise so complete that even historians missed it. It took 20th century linguists and a medieval land survey commissioned by William the Conqueror to finally crack it open. That is number 1. But before we get there, number 4 is the name that crossed the Atlantic before Columbus was born. And I do not mean that as a metaphor. I mean there is soil in Canada that has been dated to around the year 1000 AD, with the physical remains of a Norse settlement, and the family name connected to that settlement is still carried by people today who have no idea what their surname actually proves. We are going to cover all 10, and at the end I am going to ask you one specific question in the comments, because your answer might actually tell you something about your own name that you did not know before you clicked on this video. Let us start. But first, stop for a moment. Think about the last time someone asked you about your surname. Maybe at a job interview. Maybe filling out a medical form. Maybe meeting someone new who said, "That's an interesting name. Where is it from?" And what did you say? Most people say something like, "Oh, it's just a family name," or "I think it might be English," or "Honestly, I have no idea." That answer, that shrug, that moment of not knowing, that is exactly what this video is for. Because the Norse world, the civilization we call Viking, did not leave its history in museums. It left its history in language, in place names, in surnames, in the words people carry around in their pockets and sign on contracts without knowing what those words originally meant, who originally spoke them, or what kind of life that person lived over 1,000 years ago. Scandinavian linguists at the University of Oslo published research in 1987 documenting over 4,000 modern surnames of confirmed Old Norse origin across the British Isles alone. Not Scandinavia, the British Isles, because that is where the Viking settlement was heaviest, longest, and most permanent. 4,000 surnames, still in circulation, still being signed on forms and contracts and birthday cards today. Your name might be one of them. There is one thing I want to address before we go further, because I know what some of you are thinking. My family is not Scandinavian. We have no connection to Vikings. This does not apply to me. Here is why that reasoning misses the point entirely. The Norse world did not stay in Scandinavia. Between roughly 790 AD and 1066 AD, a period of 276 years, Norse people settled in England, Ireland, Scotland, France, Russia, Iceland, Greenland, and North America. They intermarried with local populations. They converted to Christianity and adopted local customs. Their names blended into local languages. And then their descendants moved again, to America, to Australia, to South America, to every corner of the world that experienced European migration. A family in Texas with the surname Strand may have zero idea that the word strand is Old Norse for the shoreline, the specific type of coastal geography that Norse families built their homes on because it was the only habitable land between the fjords and the mountains of Norway. A family in England with the surname Kettle may have zero idea that Kettle appears in the Domesday Book of 1086 as the name of a Norse landowner in Yorkshire, in a region that was governed by Norse law for nearly a full century before the Norman conquest. You do not need to know your Norse ancestry for it to be there. That is the point. Now, 10 surnames, each one a corridor leading back through fjords and longships and saga halls, and the systematic renaming of an entire civilization when the Norse world was absorbed into Christian Europe. Here is what I want you to do right now. Pull up the comments before this video ends. Write your surname, just your surname. Because by the time we reach number 1, you might understand something about that surname that nobody in your family ever explained to you. Let us go to number 10. Say it out loud. Strand. It sounds modern. It sounds like a street name, or a neighborhood, or the title of a thriller novel. It is none of those things. Strand comes from the Old Norse word strand, the shore, the beach, the precise edge where land meets water. For a civilization built entirely around the sea, this was not a poetic description. It was an address. Norse families named Strand did not live near the coast in some general sense. They lived on the narrow strips of habitable land between the mountains and the fjords, the specific geographical feature that defines the western coastline of Norway. Those strips of land were called Strandflaten, the Strand Flats, and they were among the most valuable real estate in the Norse world, because from those strips of land you could launch a ship. And launching a ship was everything. The name travelled with those ships. Norse settlers carried Strand to England, to Ireland, to Normandy, to Iceland, to the Orkney Islands. In London, central London, one of the most visited streets in one of the most visited cities in the world, there is a street called the Strand. Millions of people walk it every year. Almost none of them know that its name is Old Norse, that it was named by Viking settlers who looked at that area along the north bank of the Thames and recognized the geographical feature they had grown up with back home. The shore, the edge, the strand. If your name is Strand, your family's original address was the shoreline of the Norse world. And from that shoreline, they could reach anywhere. Because that is what the shoreline meant to them. Not a boundary, a beginning. The next name on this list sounds completely different. You have almost certainly met someone who carries it. It appears in English literature, in Scottish history, in Shakespeare. But what almost nobody knows is that it encodes a specific rank in the Viking social hierarchy, a middle tier between the farmer and the noble, and that rank determined everything about how your ancestor ate, fought, and died. One word, one syllable, 5 letters, and inside those 5 letters, a complete picture of how Viking society was structured, how it rewarded loyalty, and how it punished weakness. Thane. From the Old Norse thegn, a free man of rank, a warrior who had earned his status not through birth alone, but through demonstrated service to a chieftain or a king. Understand what that means in the context of the Norse world. Norse society was not a simple division between rich and poor, between master and slave. It had layers. At the bottom were the thralls, slaves, captured in raids or born into bondage. Above them were the carls, free farmers, craftsmen, ordinary people who owned land and owed basic military service. Above the carls were the thanes, men who had proven themselves, men who had fought, who had served, who had been personally recognized by someone with power and given something in return. Land, weapons, status. And above the thanes were the jarls, the Norse noble class, the ruling tier. But the thane occupied the crucial middle ground. He was not a slave. He was not a simple farmer. He was not yet a jarl. He was the man who had already done something worth noticing, and everyone around him knew it. The name entered English through the Viking settlement of northern and eastern England, the region historians call the Danelaw. Between roughly 865 and 954 AD, a large portion of England was governed under Norse law, with Norse administrators, Norse social structures, and Norse terminology layered directly onto Anglo-Saxon communities. The word thane was one of the terms that crossed over, because the rank it described was recognized on both sides. Shakespeare gave the title to Macbeth, Thane of Glamis, Thane of Cawdor. He did not choose that title for decoration. In Scottish history, the term survived longest in the north, exactly where Viking influence ran deepest, where Norse settlement had been most permanent, where the Old Norse social vocabulary had blended most completely into the local culture. The name Thane as a surname descends from families who carried that rank into the written record, families who were identified by what they had earned, not just by where they lived or who their father was. If your name is Thane, your bloodline carries the mark of a man who had already proven something before anyone thought to write it down. And in the Norse world, proving yourself was the only currency that mattered. The next name goes directly to the Norse gods. Not as a metaphor, not as a symbol, not as decoration. The name itself is a compound of a deity. And wearing it in the Viking Age was a public declaration of divine allegiance that your enemies would have understood immediately. Break it down. Thor, the thunder god, the protector, the son of Odin and the earth goddess Jörd, the most widely worshipped deity in the Norse pantheon, the god that ordinary people, farmers, sailors, warriors, prayed to because he was specifically the defender of mankind against the chaos at the edges of the world. Valda, ruler, power, authority. Put them together, Thorvald, power of Thor, ruler under Thor's protection. This name was not given casually. In Norse culture, naming a child after a deity was a formal act. It placed the child under divine protection from the moment of birth. It announced the family's religious allegiance to every person who heard the name spoken. And it carried a specific kind of social weight, because Thor names were especially common among warriors and seafarers, the two groups in Norse society who needed divine protection most urgently, the two groups who faced the most direct and immediate forms of death. Thor was not a god of comfort, he was a god of combat, specifically combat against the giants, the Jötnar, the forces of chaos and destruction that in Norse mythology constantly threatened to break through the boundaries of the ordered world. Calling your son Thorvald was saying something specific. It was saying, this child belongs to the fight. This child stands on the side of order against chaos. Now hold that image. The name Thorvald appears in the Vinland sagas, the Norse written accounts of exploration in North America, composed in Iceland in the 13th century, but describing events around the year 1000 AD. Thorvald Eiríksson, brother of Leif Eiríksson, the man who established the Norse settlement at Vinland. Thorvald sailed west after his brother. He reached North America, he explored the coastline, and he became the first European in the historical record to die on American soil, killed in a confrontation with indigenous people in what modern scholars place as either Newfoundland or the coast of New England. Think about that for a moment. 5 centuries before Columbus, 5 centuries before any European power claimed to have discovered the Americas, a man named Thorvald, power of Thor, died on a continent that the rest of Europe did not officially know existed. His name was written down. His voyage was recorded. His death was documented in sagas that were dismissed as mythology for over 600 years, and then confirmed as history in 1960, when archaeologists excavated L'Anse aux Meadows in Newfoundland and found the physical remains of a Norse settlement dating to approximately 1000 AD. If your name is Thorvald, in any of its modern forms, your bloodline carries the name of Thor and a man who died further from home than any European had ever traveled before him. But the most important name on this list is still coming, and it is not the name you expect. This name feels different from the others. It does not sound ancient. It does not sound Norse. It sounds like a first name your grandfather might have had, or the name of a mild-mannered accountant in a 1950s film. That feeling of ordinariness is exactly what makes it extraordinary. Norman. Norman comes from the Old Norse Nordmada, Northman, the name given by the Frankish and English populations to the Norse raiders and settlers who came from the north. It was initially a description. He is a Northman. Those are the Northmen. Watch out for the Northmen. And then something remarkable happened. In 911 AD, the Frankish king Charles the Simple made a treaty with a Norse chieftain named Rollo. He gave Rollo a territory in northern France, the territory that would become Normandy, the land of the Northmen, in exchange for Rollo's baptism into Christianity and his promise to stop raiding, to guard the coast instead of attacking it. Within 2 generations, the Norse settlers in Normandy had adopted the French language. They had converted to Christianity. They had abandoned the Old Norse tongue so completely that within a century, Virtually no one in Normandy spoke it. But they kept something else. They kept their military organization, their strategic ambition, their hunger for territory that had always driven Norse expansion. In 1066, they invaded England and won. In the 12th century, Norman forces conquered southern Italy and Sicily, building a kingdom in the Mediterranean that lasted over a century. The name Norman as a surname descends from families who identified with that transformation. Norse in origin, European in ambition, Christian in faith, and absolutely devastating in military terms. If your name is Norman, your bloodline is not just Viking. It is the hinge point between the Viking Age and the medieval world. You carry the name of the people who absorbed one civilization, transformed themselves entirely, and then reshaped another. That is not a surname. That is a pivot point in the history of the Western world. 4 letters, 1 syllable, and inside those 4 letters, the etymological origin of the word that defines an entire era of human history. Vik. From the Old Norse vik, a small bay, a coastal inlet, a sheltered creek cut into a rocky shoreline. This is the root of the word Viking itself. Linguists and historians have debated the precise origin of the term Viking for over a century. The most widely accepted explanation, supported by research from the University of Copenhagen and confirmed in analyses of Old Norse place name records, is that Vikinga, Viking, described a man from the Vik, a man of the inlets, someone who came from the sheltered coastal bays that defined the geography of Western Norway. Not a warrior, not a raider, not a helmet or an axe or a longship. An address. The surname Vik marks families from the coastal settlements of Western Norway, specifically the fjord-mouth communities where the habitable land was narrow, the water was constant, and the sea was not a barrier but a road. These were the exact departure points for the great Norse voyages. It was from the Vik settlements that ships set out for Scotland, for Ireland, for the Faroe Islands, for Iceland, for Greenland, and eventually for the coast of North America. The men who made those voyages did not call themselves Vikings in the way we use the word today. They called themselves Norsemen. They called themselves by their region, their chieftain, their ship. But the world called them Vikings. And if your name is Vik, or any of its modern variants, you do not just have Norse ancestry in some general sense. Your family's home address is the etymological source of the word that names an entire age of history. You carry the origin inside the name. 4 surnames down, 6 to go. And we are moving into territory that gets more specific, more documented, and more remarkable with every step. Say the name. Bjorn. It sounds clean, Scandinavian, modern. You have heard it in sports broadcasts, in Netflix dramas, in the names of furniture designers and tennis champions. But strip away everything modern. Go back 1,000 years. Go back to the Norse world where this name was first given to a child and understand what that act of naming actually meant. Bjorn. From the Old Norse Bjorn, the bear. Not the bear as a cute symbol, not the bear as a team mascot. The bear as the largest, most dangerous, most feared predator in the Norse world. An animal that could kill a man with a single strike. An animal that could absorb wounds that would stop anything else. An animal that, when cornered, became more dangerous, not less. In Norse warrior tradition, animal names were not decorative. They were declarations. Naming your son Bjorn was announcing something to the community. This child is dedicated to the spirit of the bear. This child carries that power. Watch him. And there was a specific reason the bear mattered more than any other animal in Norse warrior culture. The berserker. The berserkers. The word berserker in Old Norse almost certainly derives from bear, and serka, shirt, garment. Bear shirt. Men who went into battle wearing bear pelts, who fought in a state that contemporary accounts, written by people who witnessed them, described as trance-like, immune to pain, of terrifying and seemingly unnatural strength. The Byzantine emperor's Varangian Guard, Norse mercenaries who served as the personal bodyguard of the Byzantine emperor in Constantinople, documented berserker behavior in military chronicles dating to the 10th century. The Icelandic sagas describe them in detail. Medieval European chronicles mention them with a specific kind of fear that you do not find in descriptions of ordinary warriors. These men were dedicated to Odin. They were considered touched by the divine, or something beyond the divine. They were the most feared soldiers in the Viking Age, and the name Bjorn connects directly to the tradition they embodied. Björn Ironside, son of the legendary Ragnar Lothbrok, led a Norse raid in the 850s AD that took longships through the Strait of Gibraltar, along the coast of North Africa, and up the Italian peninsula. He reached the Mediterranean. He took Norse ships further south and east than almost any documented Norse voyage before him. If your name is Bjorn, or Björn, or Björn, or any variant, your bloodline carries the bear. And the Norse world believed the bear carried something that ordinary men did not. Stop here for a moment. Do not skip. Because what comes next is the part of this list that is not mythology, not poetic interpretation, not linguistic analysis. It is archaeology. It is soil. It is a physical location on a map that you can visit today. The name Eriksson, and its variants, Eriksson, Eriksson, Eiriksson, is a patronymic. Son of Eric. Son of Eirik. In most cases, that is exactly what it means. A family identifier. A way of marking which Eric your father was, in a world where Eric was a common name. But for the families who carry this name in its oldest documented form, the Eirik in question is a specific man. Eirik the Red. Born in Norway around 950 AD. Exiled to Iceland after a killing. Exiled from Iceland after another killing. Sailed west with a small fleet in approximately 985 AD and established the first permanent European settlement in Greenland, not because he was an explorer in the romantic sense, but because he had run out of places to go and needed land. His son was Leif Eiriksson. Around the year 1000 AD, approximately 1003 AD, according to the most precise dendrochronological dating of timber remains, Leif Eiriksson sailed west from Greenland and reached a place he called Vinland. He established a settlement there. In 1960, Norwegian explorer and archaeologist Helge Ingstad and his wife Anne Stein Ingstad began excavating a site at Lance Aux Meadows on the northern tip of Newfoundland, Canada. What they found was the physical remains of a Norse settlement. 8 buildings. Evidence of iron smelting, a technology the indigenous people of the region did not use. Wooden debris dated by radiocarbon analysis to approximately 1000 AD. The Norse were in North America 500 years before Columbus. Not as legend, not as saga, as soil, timber, iron slag, and radiocarbon dates confirmed by the Smithsonian Institution, Parks Canada, and the Norwegian Institute for Cultural Heritage Research. The name Eriksson is in that soil. If your surname is Eriksson, or Eriksson, or Eriksson, or any variant, your bloodline is documented not just in sagas, but in the ground of the Western Hemisphere, in a settlement that predates every other confirmed European presence in the Americas by 5 centuries. That is not ancestry. That is a historical fact with a GPS coordinate. 51 degrees, 36 minutes north, 55 degrees, 32 minutes west. Lance Aux Meadows, Newfoundland. Go look it up. Your name is connected to that place. 1 syllable. Jarl. It sounds like a name. It sounds like a place. It sounds like it could be either. It is neither. It is a title. And it is the highest secular rank in the entire Norse world, below the king himself. The Jarl commanded warriors, held territory, administered Norse law, collected tribute, and represented the highest authority in his region. A king might rule a country. A Jarl ruled everything the king could not personally be present to rule. The title was not simply inherited, it was confirmed. A Jarl received his rank from a king, or seized it through conquest, and then had it recognized. The distinction matters because it meant that every Jarl in the Norse world had, at some point, been formally identified as the most capable, most powerful, most militarily significant man in his territory. The Jarls of Orkney are among the most documented examples. From approximately 875 AD to 1150 AD, over 2.5 centuries, the Orkney Islands were ruled as a Norse domain by a continuous line of Jarls whose names, battles, and political decisions are recorded in the Orkneyinga saga, one of the most detailed political chronicles of the medieval Norse world. Now here is the linguistic fact that makes this name remarkable. The English word earl derives directly from jarl. When Norse settlers established the Danelaw in northern and eastern England, they brought their social vocabulary with them. The word jarl entered the Anglo-Saxon world. Anglo-Saxon mouths reshaped it. The J became an E, the vowel shifted, and over generations the word transformed. Jarl became Earl. The Norse title became an English title. The rank survived even after the Norse language that created it disappeared from England entirely. If your name is Jarl, you carry the title of the Norse ruling class, a word so fundamental to how the Norse world was organized that when the Norse world was absorbed into English culture, the English kept the rank and just changed the pronunciation. The title became a different word, but the authority it represented never left. Son of Sigurd. From the Old Norse Sigurda, combining Siga, victory, and Varda, guardian. Victory guardian. The one who protects the outcome. The name Sigurd is not just a Norse name. It is the name at the center of the most important story the Norse world ever told about itself. The Völsunga saga, composed in Iceland in the 13th century, but preserving material that Norse scholars at the University of Reykjavik trace back to oral traditions at least 500 years older, is the story of Sigurd the Dragon Slayer, the hero who kills Fafnir, a man transformed by greed into a dragon and claims his cursed treasure. The hero who rides through a wall of fire to wake a Valkyrie. The hero who is betrayed, destroyed, and mourned across an entire civilization. Richard Wagner spent 26 years composing his Ring Cycle, 4 operas, approximately 15 hours of music, based directly on this story. J.R.R. Tolkien drew from it explicitly. The dragon Smaug, the cursed ring, the doomed hero, Tolkien acknowledged his debt to the Norse material directly in his letters and academic writing. The name Sigurd appears throughout Scandinavian royal lineages. Multiple Norwegian kings, multiple jarls, multiple chieftains across 3 centuries of Norse history. The patronymic Sigurdsson, son of Sigurd, marks a family that considered itself part of this tradition, connected to the name that carried more literary and mythological weight than almost any other in the Norse world. If your name is Sigurdsson, or Sigurdsson, or any variant, your bloodline carries the name of the greatest hero in Norse mythology. And every story that hero inspired for the next 1,000 years is, in some small way, also yours. And now, number 1. This is the name that hid. Say it out loud. Kettle. It sounds like something in your kitchen. It sounds like the object you fill with water and put on the stove. It sounds like the most ordinary English word imaginable. That is exactly what makes it the most remarkable name on this list. Because kettle is not an English word that became a surname. It is a Norse name that became an English word, and in doing so, hid itself so completely that for 900 years, nobody recognized what it actually was. From the Old Norse kettle, a cauldron, a vessel, a large container used for cooking, for brewing, for the kind of communal preparation that happened at the center of Norse domestic life. But in Norse personal name tradition, kettle was not a description of an object. It was a name of significant weight and frequency. It appears in the Icelandic sagas. It appears in Scandinavian royal records. It appears as the name of chieftains, landowners, and figures of regional authority across 3 centuries of Norse history. And then the Norse settled in England. The Domesday Book, the great land survey commissioned by William the Conqueror in 1086 AD, the most comprehensive census of medieval England ever conducted, lists Kettle as a landowner in Yorkshire, in Lincolnshire, in the East Midlands. These were the core territories of the Danelaw, the region of England that had been governed under Norse law from approximately 865 to 954 AD, nearly a century of Norse administration, Norse social structures, Norse terminology embedded into the landscape and the population. The name Kettle survived, through the Norman conquest, through the Middle English period, through the early modern period, and at some point the Norse personal name kettle and the Old English word settle, which also meant a large cooking vessel and had been borrowed from Latin centuries before the Vikings arrived, merged, overlapped, became indistinguishable. The Norse name became an English noun, an object in a kitchen, something you fill with water, and the families who carried it as a surname kept carrying it through 9 centuries of English history with no idea that their name was Old Norse, that it appeared in the Domesday Book as the name of a landowner in Viking settled England, that it had survived the complete absorption of the Norse world into Christian European civilization by hiding inside an ordinary word that everyone used every day. If your name is Kettle, you are walking around with a Viking name that disguised itself so thoroughly it became invisible. It took 20th century linguistics to find it again. And now you know. 10 names, 10 corridors leading back through fjords and longships and saga halls, and the systematic renaming of a civilization when the Norse world was absorbed into Christian Europe. Strand placed your family on the shoreline of the Norse world, the edge where the land ended and every voyage began. Thane gave your ancestor a rank earned through loyalty and combat, the middle tier of a society that measured a man by what he had proven. Thorvald put the power of the thunder god in a name and sent it to a continent no European was supposed to know existed. Norman made your bloodline the hinge point between two eras, the people who absorbed one civilization and transformed another. Vic gave your family an address that became the word for an entire age of history. Bjorn carried the bear into battle and the warrior tradition that terrified 4 continents. Ericsson left your name in the soil of the Western Hemisphere. 5 centuries before the voyage, everyone was taught to celebrate. Jarl handed your bloodline the title of the Norse ruling class, a word so powerful it became a different word in a different language and kept working. Sigurdsson connected your family to the greatest hero in Norse mythology and every story that hero inspired for 1,000 years. And Kettle hid so well for 9 centuries that it became a kitchen object, and only came back when someone looked hard enough. Your name did not come from nowhere. It came from people who carved it into wood and stone and saga before paper existed. People who carried it across oceans that had no maps. People who lived and fought and sailed and died under names that encoded their gods, their ranks, their coastlines, their bloodlines, and then passed those names forward through 1,000 years of war and migration and forced conversion and cultural absorption until the names arrived here. With you. Signing forms, writing cards, answering when someone asks. Drop your surname in the comments right now, just your surname. And next to it, write a number. The number of the name on this list that hit you hardest. 1 through 10. Tell me which one stopped you. Which one made you think differently about a name you have been writing your whole life without knowing what it meant. If you know someone who has been quietly curious about their family name, someone who has always had a feeling there was something behind it but never knew where to look, send them this video. 1 share, that is all. Because the answer they have been looking for might be in the next 10 minutes of their life, if you put it in front of them. And next week, we go further. Next week we are opening the surnames that trace directly to the Norse gods themselves. Not names that reference the gods. Names that were given by families who were formally dedicated to specific deities, Odin, Freyr, Tyr, as a binding religious act. We have found a primary source document from the University of Uppsala's Runology archive dated to the 11th century that records the naming ceremony in detail, and what it describes about what those families believed they were doing when they named a child. Nobody talks about this. Next week. Be here.